friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Eliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. On our program today, we're talking science fiction fantasy writing with local author J.D. Byrne, who was born and raised in Charleston, West Virginia. He spent 7 years in Morgantown getting degrees in history and law from WVU. He's practiced law for more than 15 years, writing briefs, real facts, and real law. He works as a federal public defender in Charleston, and he lives outside of Charleston with his wife and his one-eyed dog, and we're here to talk about several of his books today. One trilogy called the Water Road series, and we're also going to talk about his collection of short stories that came out last year, and also talk about his upcoming projects as well regarding science fiction and fantasy writing. So JD, great to have you here on Chapters. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to ask you one question before we get into your books. I was looking on your website, and one comment you made about writing in this genre, or about your books in particular, is that you feel like your writing and your books get lobbed into the category of speculative fiction. Mm-hmm. So what is exactly speculative fiction? What does that term mean, and how does that pertain to what you write and the style and genre that you're writing in?
Well, I think of speculative fiction as the umbrella term that includes science fiction, fantasy, horror, anything that is not really of this world. And I'm happy to lob all my stuff into it. It becomes a little bit more interesting when you have authors who are not typically genre writers who decide to come in to the genre and write a science fiction novel, write a fantasy novel, and then they're going to try to insist that they're not really writing science fiction or fantasy. So I'm eager to say that's what I do, and I think there's a lot of value in the genre, both from just a pure entertainment value, but also in terms of expanding your horizons and exploring ideas about humanity and where we're going and where we've been and things like that. So that's what I tend to think about it.
Do we see in this genre of science fiction fantasy a lot of writers doing what you're talking about, sort of stepping into the genre, writing a book or two in that genre, but maybe they're a mystery writer, or maybe they're a nonfiction writer, and then stepping out? Does that happen quite a lot in that area, or is that something that is rather rare?
It seems like it's been happening more recently. I think especially with the popularity of someone like Neil Gaiman, and the popularity of the George R.R. Martin series, Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, the TV show, that maybe it's a little bit more visible, or a little bit more inviting for some people, because you have folks like you mentioned mystery writer. Of course, P.D. James wrote P.D. James wrote Children of Men, which was dipping into dystopian science fiction. You have Margaret Atwood, who mm-hmm. has done that a lot, and who very much doesn't want her stuff called science fiction. Mm-hmm. And there's some other people like that, and like I said, some of them are a little bit more vocal than others about what they're doing and what they're not doing. And I would welcome anybody that wants to come and play around with the tools that we have in the genre. Yeah, everybody's welcome.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I want to ask you, too, before we get into looking at your books, what do you find challenging about writing in the science fiction fantasy genre? Because when we read science fiction fantasy, one of the things that always impresses me, and it impressed me so much about your books, is the way you build settings and build these worlds that we're going to be immersed in. Do you find that as a challenge, or what is it about writing in that genre that you find particularly challenging as you keep writing and keep publishing?
Well, the world building is challenging. It's a lot of fun, too. You have to, at least I have to, keep good notes and kind of keep an idea of where you're going, what you're doing, so that you don't wind up 200 pages down the road doing something that you've already said can't happen or works differently in that world than ours. But the most difficult thing for me, I think, and the most important thing for me, are the characters, because the world can be fascinating, but if the people who are in it, if the reader doesn't care about them, it really doesn't matter. And so that's the part for me that I try to put the most focus on. But certainly the world building has its pitfalls that you have to avoid.
Yeah. You've got two really great characters. When we talk about characters and world building in your Water Road trilogy series, which starts off with book one, and really what goes on in that first book in volume one is two women discovering a hidden secret that kind of makes them or leads them down a path where they both have to make some decisions. Tell us a little bit about who those women are and kind of what's going on in that first book.
Well, that first book, like you said, is basically two stories. The main character, and she's sort of the main character for the whole of the trilogy, is named Antry, and she is a child of mixed parentage, is the kind of euphemism they use in that world. She has a Neldathi father, or Neldathi mother, and an Altrarian father, and so she's sort of not at home with either people, and so she is taken in by a kind of civil servant in the capital of this alliance, and is given access to a lot of things, and she discovers this secret, and she kind of acts out on it. She has to decide what to do about it. And then coming at it from another direction is a woman named Streffer, who is a journalist, and she works for the newspaper that covers the politics in town, but she doesn't get to cover the politics. She covers the kind of blood and guts street beat. And so she, kind of through the back channels, discovers the same thing. And so it becomes a story of what these two women are doing in their different ways to, motivated by this secret and what the world needs to know about it and what needs to be done about it.
Very good, very good. One of the things that really caught my attention in this book and in all the books that you wrote is your great first lines. You have a great first line in book one which caught my attention. It's in the prologue. Great first line, got my attention immediately. And it says, "It had been 10 years since Gavin had been confronted by an angry Neldathi with a gun." A powerful first line that really gets the reader engaged. Is that something that, when you were writing that first book, and really all the books in the trilogy and all the books that you write, all of them have great first lines, is that something that you set out to do from the very beginning, or is that something that just kind of comes as you start developing and getting into the story?
Well, I think you need to have something that kind of lures people in, kind of maybe makes them cock their head and go, huh, that's interesting. It doesn't always come, the first time. You don't always sit down at the blank computer screen these days and bang out the first line and you're like, yeah, that's it. You got to go back and you got to think about it. But that one actually came fairly easily because I knew I had this prologue that kind of sets up this mystery that plays out through the other books, and I knew I wanted to have that real grabber, and I thought I could. So I'm glad that comes across.
Yeah, it was great. A wonderful first line that really got me engaged. So as we get into book two of the Water Road trilogy, what's going on there? Where does the story pick up in terms of the two women and the secrets as we go forward in book two?
Well, book two deals with what happens after Antry has essentially unified the Neldathi people, and after Streffer has let the rest of the world know what the Alliance, the Triumvirate, had been doing to them. And so it's a war book, essentially. And on the one hand, you have the Neldathi army and what they're doing and the battles they are fighting, but you also have Streffer, who's trying to get to the bottom of the mystery that's set up in that first line. And so it's actually a more kind of sprawling book. The Water Road is, as you said, it's the two of them. And it actually had a couple other kind of main character side plots originally as I planned it, but the further I got into it, it was like, this is their story. It's a parallel story. But the Endless Hills casts a much wider net, and so we have characters who are sort of higher up in the decision-making structure of this war, foot soldiers, and people trying to figure out what it is that's kind of going on in the world.
Very good. It's excellent, and it's really interesting to follow that as you go through that. I want to ask you, too, about a series of short stories that you wrote, which I really found interesting, and that was called The Last Arif, which came out, I believe, in February of 2014?
15.
2015. there's 10 stories in that collection. None of them really have a common theme, but we get that fantasy and science fiction element. And I wanted to ask you about one story that I really liked in that collection, which was The Dragon of the Bailey, which is about a dragon who's being held captive. And if we think about dragons, we think about Grimm's fairy tales, we think about, we think about J.R.R. Tolkien and his use of dragons and how all that filters into some of the most common science fiction fantasy writing that maybe we're familiar with. This is sort of a different take on that, because instead of the dragon kind of being the captor or the conduit to capture somebody, the roles have been reversed, and now he's captured, or it's captured. Tell us a little bit about that story and what goes on there, and where did the idea for making the dragon the captured person come from?
The idea actually came from one of my kind of regular routines, lunchtime at work, is to go to the front page of Wikipedia, and they've got, in addition to news headlines and like a feature article, they have a bunch of little short things that lead you to various articles. You click through there and you start clicking and you start clicking. And one day, one of the things on the front page was about the Tower of London. And there are ravens at the Tower of London, and there is someone there whose job it is to take care of the ravens. And there is a legend that so long as the ravens are at the Tower of London, the English crown will stand. So if you read deeper into the article, one of the jobs of the guy who takes care of the ravens is to clip their wings so they can't fly away. And I thought, well, that's kind of putting your thumb on the scale, isn't it? So I really liked that idea. And so I thought about how could I sort of take that and make it more of a fantastical thing. And so I thought about dragons, because in some cultures, dragons have feathered wings, more Eastern mythologies, I think. And so I thought about, you had this lord or king or whomever who keeps this dragon, but the dragon's smart enough to know what's going on. And so he finally wants to get out and do what he can to maybe exact a little payback.
Very good. It's so unique. It's such a unique twist on that, because we think of the dragon as being this overbearing, awe-inspiring force that can't be harnessed very easily, but yet it is in that particular story, which
Right.
I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think of him as about the size of like a large dog,
Yeah.
as opposed to the big, Game of Thrones fire breathers.
Absolutely, very good. There's another story in your collection there of the Last Arif that I really liked, and I think this had. I did some research on this story after I read it, because when I was reading it, I thought maybe it had some semblance to a true event, and that's To Watch the Storms. And I wondered if that had been something that you had experienced or had some experience with, and I did some research and found out that this was inspired by a thunderstorm that you experienced in Richmond, Virginia. Tell us a little bit about that story and how that made its way into your story, To Watch the Storms.
A part of what I do for work is occasionally I go to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond for oral arguments. And one time I was down there, we had a couple arguments during the week, so I was down there for a couple of days, and we were staying at the Omni Hotel down there in downtown Richmond, and it was like on the 12th or 13th floor, so fairly high up, and this thunderstorm just sort of rolled in, and the way the windows are on that side of the Omni, they're not flat, they're sort of indented. So there were things, mist swirling around and everything, and I sort of thought, well, it might be neat if there's something in the storm. So I came up with a little idea that sort of has the bookend discussion of, do you believe in aliens and all that kind of stuff. And it was a fun little thing to write more than anything else.
Yeah, it was a great story. I enjoyed it very much as well.
Gave me a good excuse to steal a Steve Hackett song for a title.
So To Watch the Storms, absolutely. Yes, very good. That's exactly right. So I wanted to ask you, before we go back to talking about your novels, similarities and differences between writing novels and short stories. Do you find it easier or harder to write one or the other, or do they really challenge you in any way as a writer doing both? Because some of the techniques in writing short stories and novels are the same, but the format's different, the length and that kind of thing. Do you find one easier than the other? Do you prefer one as opposed to the other?
I don't know that I prefer one to the other. I'm sort of more focused on novels right now. They both have their challenges and their rewards. Novels, you get to sort of sprawl more, and that is something you have to kind of watch for. And you need more planning. You got to know where you're going, stuff like that. Short stories you can do a little bit. At least I can do a little bit more seat of the pants. But there you got to be more immediate. You got to really jump into things quickly. When it gets really hard, is what I'm trying to do right now, which is I'm working on some 250 word flash fiction stories for a contest at the end of the month. And you have an idea and you sit down and you write it, and it's a page and a half, and you think, okay, I'm in good shape. That's 350 words. So you gotta find a way to cut a third of that while establishing characters and establishing what kind of world they're in and having something happen. And it's a real challenge, but it's a real good exercise.
So just to clarify for some folks in our audience who may not be familiar with that term, flash fiction is what?
Flash fiction is generally short fiction that is no longer than 800 or 1,000 words. A typical short story is probably closer to 5,000. Although it depends on who you are and what your market is and all that kind of stuff.
Very good, very good. Well, we wish you best of luck on that
Thanks.
contest, and hope you do well. I want to ask you about another book, another novel that you wrote, which was really unique and interesting in terms of the setup and the plot, and that was The Destiny Engine. And I love the cover for this, and we'll get a still shot of this and put it up on the screen for our viewers. But tell us a little bit about what's going on in the Destiny Engine, because that was really a unique story as well.
Okay. Well, it's a short story, and it's only available through my website if you sign up for my mailing list. That was actually sprung out of another contest. Someone on the West Virginia Writers Facebook page mentioned a anthology that involved retellings of Brothers Grimm stories. And so I thought, that's a neat idea. I could sort of sci-fi fantasy that up a little bit. But I wanted to do something maybe that people weren't all that familiar with. So, I downloaded their stuff and read through it. And there's a Grimm's Brothers story called The Aged Widow or The Aged Mother, depending on what edition it is. And it's essentially about this woman whose family has all died. And she's bereft because of it and is trying to kind of come to grips with it. And so I thought about this idea of giving it sort of a steampunk makeover, and the main character, not the main character in the book, the main character is the servant, I guess, but the guy he works for was a disgraced patent medicine salesman, and he kind of gets run out of town, so he's stuck in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. And this woman comes seeking help, and he provides it because it gives him a chance to show off his new machine, which is the Destiny Engine, which kind of shows you maybe some what-if scenarios for people who are no longer with us, and it backfires, and he's on the run again. So
it's a great story because great characters, but you're wondering sort of what's going to happen here. Well, where's this going, and ultimately who's going to be left sort of when the machine is exposed. So it's a great story. So when we think about science fiction and fantasy authors, who are some authors that influence you, or who are some authors whose work you admire, or maybe some authors whose work you tend to go back to time and time again if you're looking for inspiration for ideas or stories?
I don't know about going looking for inspiration or for story ideas necessarily, but there tend to be two groups of people. There's the group that I read first when I was in elementary school and junior high, which includes some very sort of serious science fiction, Asimov, and there was a period in 5th grade where I read like Brave New World and 1984 and Anthem. Back to back. So, I don't know what that says about my 5th grade, but
just for some light reading,
right? Just from light reading. But then the other thing that I got introduced to at that time, thanks to my older brother, was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So Douglas Adams. Then more recently, as I started writing seriously and started thinking about reading more seriously, I've really gotten into lately. Well, George R.R. Martin. My wife introduced me to him, into Neil Gaiman. I had sort of known his name around, but hadn't read any of his stuff. He's wonderful. Margaret Atwood. My newest discovery is a guy named Ian Tregillis, who's written. He has a third book coming out this winter about clockwork robots, essentially, in an alternate history 19th century. It's really interesting. Stuff's really interestingly done. So, but it's one of those things I always feel hesitant to talk about influences, because I tell somebody, oh, I read Neil Gaiman, I love Neil Gaiman stuff, and they're like, oh, he writes like Neil Gaiman. It's like, well, not necessarily.
Right.
And even books you read that you don't like influence you. Mm-hmm. So, it's one of those things I try and take in as much as I can, and crank it through the filter.
Sure.
See what happens.
And I think that's excellent advice. To take something from every book you read, whether you like it or not, or it's a favorite of yours or not. What's your process like for writing? When you get an idea, let's say for a novel, because you've talked a little bit about the contest you're working on and some short stories, but the idea for a novel. Once you get that idea, what's your process like from getting that idea down to drafting to revision and all of that? What's your process like? And typically for one of your books, More Hollow or the Water Road trilogy, how long does it take you to sort of get that first draft finished?
The first draft in terms of actually writing, maybe a couple of months. A lot of these were started during National Novel Writing Month, where the idea is you sit down every day and you write, you produce 50,000 words, which is technically novel length, but by the end of it, it's probably not the finished product. And then I usually take about another month after that to finish it up. And then the editing process can take a few months to a few years, depending. Because I tend to do a first draft, and then I go through and do a second draft, rewriting the whole thing. I learned writing at work that sometimes when you have pieces of a brief or something written by different people, and you don't want it to come through as different voices, so you have to kind of rewrite everything so it comes out in yours. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times the first draft is getting down on paper what happens, and then the second draft is going through and rewriting it, making sure things are linking up, if there are holes, filling them in, stuff like that. And then once I have the second draft, then it's sit down with the red pen and paper and all that. So
very good. So what's next for you? What's J.D. Byrne working on next, or what can we expect coming down the road or coming down the pipeline from you?
Well, the next thing will be the final book in the Water Road trilogy, which is called The Bay of Sins. It should be out early in 2017. It's in the editing process. After that, I don't know. I've got a lot of things in the idea files on the computer. And I have ideas for a couple of series, and some ideas for some standalone books. And some of them are sci-fi, some of them are fantasy, some of them are more kind of modern paranormal, kind of like More Hollow is. So I'll have to see when I get to that point what I'm feeling like and which one of those speaks to me, or something might pop up in between there and demand to be written. So
great.
You never know.
Yeah. So it sounds like you got some really good ideas coming down the road, and that's great. So in our final moments with you, JD, if someone in our audience wants to get in contact with you to talk to you about your books or to talk to you about your writing or get copies of any of your books, the Water Road trilogy or the Last Arif or whatever it is that you've published, Destiny Engine, where can they get your books? How can they get in contact with you?
The best place to get the books, if you want a hard copy, is right here at Empire. More Hollow is also available at Tamarack. If you're more interested in electronic versions, they're available exclusively at Amazon. And like I said, the Destiny Engine is available on my website if you want to sign up for my mailing list. That's jdbyrne.net.
Okay.
Yeah, and there are links there. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Goodreads and all that kind of stuff. So.
Great. Excellent. Fantastic. J.D. Byrne has been our guest today here on Chapters. He writes science fiction, fantasy in that speculative fiction genre, in that speculative fiction area. He's the author of the Water Road trilogy series, More Hollow, the short story collection, The Last Arif, the short story, The Destiny Engine, and a variety of other projects as well. J.D., we appreciate you coming on Chapters today. Congratulations, not only on what you have published, but what you're working on now. We wish you all the best of luck, and we look forward to having you back on Chapters soon to talk about what you're working on. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Eliot. Thanks for having me.
We want to take a moment to thank the staff and management of Empire Books and News for providing our on-site support and assistance today. We encourage you to come down to Empire Books and News and pick up a copy of JD's books right here at the store. And if you have any questions or comments about any reading tastes that you need satisfied, the staff at Empire Books and News can help you. So we encourage you to come down and check them out, talk to them, and you can find many of the authors, editors, and publishers who we've featured on the program. They have their works for sale right here at Empire Books and News. So we encourage you to come down to the store at Pullman Square in downtown Huntington and get any reading taste satisfied, whatever genre, whatever type of book you like to read. They've got it for you here, right here at Empire Books and News. And we appreciate them sponsoring us each and every program here on Chapters. And if you like to use social media, we've made it possible for you to engage with the program through a variety of social media platforms. One of those is our email address. It's lp4@zoominternet.net. So we encourage you to email the program with any questions, comments, or suggestions about this program or any program that you've seen here on Armstrong Television. Please let us know your name and where you're writing from so that we can keep track of that correspondence. If you prefer to interact with us through YouTube, we have a Chapters page through the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube, and that address is youtube.com/Armstrong One Wire, which is all one word. From there, click on the Chapters tab, and we've got all of our episodes archived for you there, and you can go back and watch an episode for the second or third time, and also leave comments in the comments fields there as well. And if you're a Facebook user, we have a Chapters page on Facebook as well. All you need to do is go to facebook.com, in the search field type in Chapters, and from there you can find all of our most recent Chapters episodes archived there, as well as interact and comment on the program and interact with viewers of the show as well. So we know many of you have reached out to the program, watched those episodes, and left comments through one of those social media platforms, and we appreciate that so very much. But we have those available to you and for you so you can keep in contact and keep up with what's going on here on our Chapters program. And that will do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.